Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Butcher. I'm the editor-at-large for TechCrunch. TechCrunch is based out of San Francisco. We have about 20 million readers, and we cover venture capital and startups. And so it's my delight to be joined by two fantastic speakers this afternoon here at XPANSE to talk about things like R&D and getting value from research into the wider public sector, public environment, public ecosystem. Stephane Timpano, CEO of Aspire, the furthest away from me, and Shahid Ahmed is Group EVP at NTT. In the old days, we used to say NTT Docomo, didn't we? But that was a long time ago. So Stephane, what is the Advanced Technology Research Center of Abu Dhabi? Because that's what you're working on. Tell us briefly what it is.
So thank you for having me today. ATRC is born 5 years ago, more or less. In May 25 will be 5 years. So 5 years ago it was nothing. And it came out from an idea from the president of the UAE to say, if I want to drive the shift from oil to knowledge economy, I need to start investing in IP, investing in brains, and have these brains grow in the UAE. The UAE for years have been buying most of the technology they've been using, mostly in the oil industry, but also in anything else. And so the idea was to say, I want to progressively get autonomous, want to be able to do my own things, want to also go beyond the fact that some technology are controlled and I can't import them. So let's build up an R&D center able to do that. So this is how TII has started. And across TII, other organizations are born, like Aspire, which I lead, which basically does all the business development part of ATRC, plus the technology challenge like A2RL, the Autonomous Racing League. And also Venture One, which basically takes the products we develop and create ventures, companies, startups, licensing, and bring it to the market.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear more about that in a moment. But Shahid, you've been an advisor to the Federal Communications Commission in the United States on technology issues, and in fact, under 3 White House administrations, in fact. So clearly you've been in some interesting rooms, I dare say, over the few years. But when you come to this subject of getting research out into the wide R&D that often comes out of the public sector or working with governments, what are the kinds of things that you think about this subject, and how do you approach it?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, at least in the US...
I think maybe hold this...
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's such a small group. So in the US today, we depend quite a bit on the public R&D institutions. So, for example, DARPA, as many of you know, responsible for Internet Protocol back in the early days. And similarly, we've seen a number of different initiatives by the DoD on quantum computing, crypto, and so on. So we do rely quite a bit on public institutions and try to channel some of those developments and R&D efforts into the private sector. So that is something that framework is in place today, but increasingly we're seeing with AI more private sector R&D driving public sector agenda. So that'll be very interesting to see.
Do you feel that the public sector has been slow to pick up on generative AI as a new tool?
Absolutely. I think most regulators as well as governments around the globe have been very, very slow, or like many of us, surprised how quickly AI took shape and took hold of pretty much everything we do in life, from, you know, ranging from your personal phone to enterprise applications. AI is pretty much pervasive. So yeah, I think they were caught off guard.
Well, I think it's a really interesting subject, isn't it? Because there's so much about AI that really requires quite a lot of technological heavy lifting. And it does appear to be the case that only the biggest technology platforms and governments could actually get involved. Stephane, I know that there are some initiatives in the UAE around compute for AI, for instance. So buying NVIDIA GPUs or GPUs from anyone else, getting compute into the UAE, setting up those cloud networks that are so important for AI. Have you been looking at that? Is it informing your strategy going forward at the moment?
Well, I think long back ago, the country have seen AI as an opportunity, and we have been the first country with H.E. Omar that actually put a minister of AI in place, where there is in the government someone who is an expert, has built up with his team a plan to support the UAE grow in this space. And it doesn't come only with nice slides, but also with building up the infrastructures to be able to do that. And there are several initiatives that has been done from the infrastructure perspective, where with the biggest players and locally we've been building up infrastructure we own, but also we develop the talent around AI. We have developed Falcon in TII, which is an LLM, which is performing very well globally. And this is the ones that today AI-71 use as a base to develop products for the UAE government. So I think because of the vision we had years ago, we were already ready to start embarking AI in the most common application for the government. And we have taken decisions early on that maybe in other countries are more complicated to take.
I'm glad you said, was it called AR-71 or A?
Yeah, AI-71.
One of the things I've noticed when I've been visiting the UAE is you have a lot of initiatives. There's Falcon, there's AR-71, there's something else. There's a whole bunch of initiatives. I mean, how do you delineate who does what in these? And also, you've got Abu Dhabi and you've got Dubai, haven't you? So, you know, are you coordinating any of these initiatives or these efforts?
So they are, from outside, you may see that as overlapping initiatives. Reality is that Falcon and AI-71 have the same founding father, if you wish. It's His Excellency Faisal Al-Banai, who is the chairman of ATRC. TII has developed Falcon, and then one of the things we have done is to bring Falcon to the market through AI-71. G42.
Here we go. See, G42. Now,
which is another part
more acronyms
of the puzzle, but G42 focus on the infrastructure side, right, which we're not focusing on as a TRC.
Right.
So from outside, you may see that as a competing organization. In reality, a lot of these things have one unique direction. There will be certainly in some areas overlap, but there is one mission.
And how much coordination is happening between these organizations?
Well, there are several councils that have been organized at national and federal level to make sure that any effort done within Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, and also in the other Emirates work closely together. And H.E. Omar, as Minister of AI, has this role to coordinate.
It's clear that governments are incredibly enthusiastic about technology, and this is happening where I'm from as well, of course, in the UK as well. A lot of it's about things like AI safety. But there are often overlapping organizations, there's regulators, there's government accelerators, things like that. Shahid, when you deal at that kind of level, and obviously you've dealt with the highest levels of US government as well, what do you advise the public sector in terms of that kind of coordination? Do you feel that there should be some kind of supranational body, or are you or do you at NTT, do you say, you know, we'll work with all players, or what do you think?
A couple of things. First, I think governments and regulators are playing catch up related to AI. There isn't a global framework, at least from a regulation perspective. So governance, privacy, security, those are big ticket items for any AI company to play under those guardrails. And they're simply not there. And so a lot of regulators are playing catch up, trying to figure out what how to regulate AI. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for any new company, or for that matter, any existing AI company trying to build new products and services. So that's point one. I think the second thing is, in terms of how public sector could play a role, even take electrification. Now, granted, in the U.S. with the new administration, there may be some major changes there. What about the rest of the world? And so it is highly dependent on the political landscape, as we have just recently discovered in the U.S. And so it really, for a company like NTT, we have to really kind of watch what's happening in geopolitics, as well as internally start building our infrastructure and R&D processes so it can pivot to any new set of policies out there.
I know that you at NTT have been talking about something called Edge AI. Now, for those of you not aware, edge computing has been around for some time, and it's obviously often around small devices at the edge of the network, which can interact with sensors or whatever is going on. And now, AI is effectively coming to that edge, right at the edge, right on to literally to a doorknob, see if the door opens or not. When you talk about, I mean, obviously edge has been around a long time as a technology, but when you talk about edge AI, what do you mean? All right,
so let me kind of decompose that into a few pieces. If you look at ChatGPT 4.0, it is made up of, 40 billion parameters. And so it's really a stochastic, probabilistic model, right? So just think of a decision tree. That's too big for any edge device, like a lock, or a thermostat, or a video camera. And to provide that kind of compute power for that huge large language model, it's nearly impossible to do that. And you cannot rely on the cloud because you have these latency-sensitive applications and use cases. So in essence, what you need is a small language model. Now, there's no such thing as a small language model, but what you can create is a actionable AI model that's mathematically based. And so it focuses on very specific use cases. For example, if you have an image that's coming in and you want to take an action, it can very quickly provide that kind of feedback. And so what we're talking about is, instead of 40 billion parameters, we're only talking about 10 parameters. And it can be, that AI model can be loaded into a small compute box, even a Raspberry Pi type processor.
And is this something that governments are interested in? What's the sort of public sector kind of deployment of this look like?
I think for me, this is more applicable to industrial use cases.
Right.
Manufacturing, mining operations, airports.
Well, airports is very public sector, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think in public sector, look, I mean, some of those use cases can be used, but this is more applicable to factories and those kinds of use cases.
Right, I see. Stephane, I know that speaking of deploying this kind of thing in the real world, but I know that A2LL, if I've got that right, here we go with another acronym, the Abu Dhabi Autonomous Racing League. So now, what is it, and B, what is it giving back to Abu Dhabi in a sort of that kind of R&D sense that we're talking about here that wouldn't otherwise exist?
Yeah, very good question. So Abu Dhabi Autonomous Racing League is an idea that started 18 months ago, so not that far away. On the back of a lot of things that we were doing in TII, in the advanced robotics, in AI, in autonomy for other customers, right? And so we wanted to try to push the acceptance of autonomous solutions to the world. And we believe that in the back of what the IAC has been doing in the US, I know you know it pretty well, but in the US they have started doing something similar with Indy model on an oval circuit. And we say we want to go a little bit beyond that. So we take super formulas which are sub-Formula 1 cars, very similar to Formula 1 cars, go very, very, very fast. We stripe away the human module, we put an autonomous kit on it, and we put not only one, but 4 cars together racing on a Formula 1 circuit. Why we do that? Because if you're able to show that and to get performance close to Formula 1 on that context, and you do it safely, we can certainly push the envelope and convince people that autonomy actually can work. And if you're able to do it in the complex situations, then you can also apply it to grand mobility. And then you start developing that. The biggest issue in mobility today and in pushing autonomy is people. That's the only factor we don't really control today. And if we're not able to show to the people that actually an autonomous solution works, they will never put their mother, their sister, their father in an autonomous car. So
right.
One was to show to the world that in Abu Dhabi we can develop this kind of technologies, which we have done and we keep on doing. Now we are also launching drones and drone races and buggy races, but also to push the global envelope on mobility, showing to people that it works.
Is the idea to take that kind of technology and learning and apply it mainly to the UAE and to Abu Dhabi, or is it, or do you have a vision to export it, or how do you scale it, or is it more like a demonstrator?
So it was a demonstrator until a few days ago. A few days ago, through Venture One, another company over at TRC, we launched Steer AI. Steer AI de facto produce autonomous kits and software solutions and sells that to Abu Dhabi organizations. There is a plan in Abu Dhabi to shift in the next 10 years more than 30% of the fleet to an autonomous fleet, right? So traditional fleet to autonomous fleet. And for sure, if we're able to show that here, well, we have opportunities to sell it abroad. The beauty of being here, and going back to the regulatory element, is that it's a young nation. There are regulations, there are very good regulations, but they are more adaptable and more flexible compared to situation elsewhere where changing the mobility rules in a city like Paris, Rome, or New York, it's a little bit different.
Right. So I suppose you have a bit more of a blank sheet of paper to work with here than a much more highly, complex, regulated region, like, for instance, like working in Paris or somewhere like that. Shahid, you must come across a lot of these kinds of public-private initiatives. What's some of your learnings about how to make those work and get the most value out of it for both parties?
Actually, just speaking of electric cars, I mean, you live in San Francisco, you know Waymo. I mean, that works.
I flip between SF and London, but I was in a Waymo just the other day, and it was a fascinating experience. I reckon if you go to San Francisco or LA as well at the moment, you'll see these autonomous taxis, and it's an amazing experience.
Right. I mean, it works.
Yeah.
And
was NTT involved in that?
No, we weren't involved. Right. But what I was going to say is that Waymo worked really well with the local mayor's office as well as the transportation department in California. So, I mean, it is possible. I mean, this stuff can be done, and we know it works. So those of you who've been to San Francisco, definitely try Waymo. It's completely autonomous. But my point here is that it is possible, and it can be replicated. Now, San Francisco is no New York or Paris or Rome, for that matter, but it can be done. But we do need the regulators to play a significant role in enabling these kinds of technologies to take shape in the commercial sector.
To your point, it's working, it's starting. I think it's creating the interest and the trust. I think trust is the most important word here, because from a technological perspective, we have most of the things it takes to make it work. We need a little bit more investment. 5-10 years from now, it will be a very mature technology. What really matters is the trust of the people to start using it.
How much do you have to work with politicians at a political level in order to get decision making over the line, especially around, say, autonomous taxis, or it could be, you know, edge computing. It could be anything. What sort of experience are you thinking?
Well, if you were Elon Musk, I think you were sitting pretty well at the moment. It looks like we're going to have electrification quite accelerated over the next 4 years. But that put aside, I think you do need to play a significant part with the local community, the city, the Department of Transportation in the case of electrification. But more broadly speaking, I think governments all around the world need to have a dedicated regulator managing and governing AI and those kinds of developments happening everywhere.
Well, and from your perspective, Stephane, you've obviously got an agency working specifically on this, and obviously you have political will. Is the door fully open at that level all the time, or is there sometimes a lot of pushback, perhaps on whatever issue it is?
I think the model in the US and elsewhere in the world is there is an entrepreneur mad enough to drive this conversation and try to push it and to convince politicians and administration to adopt it. Here it's the opposite. We have leadership who is really believing in changing the world and using technology to boost the growth of the country. So it comes from the top. And this helps a lot to really, have access to the funds, have a long-term commitments, because this requires investment. So you can't play a year or two and try. You need to build up, and it costs a lot of money. And then you need to, convince people that it is safe by building up the right infrastructures and showcasing it.
Finally, from both of you, I'd like to know, when you're putting in place policies or putting new initiatives in, how do you measure the kind of societal impact of what you're working on, especially in terms of, it could be, new supply chain, or it could be anything to do, or it could be, say, public sector education initiatives, or it could be mobility. How do you measure it, and how do you use those measurements and those KPIs, I guess, to prove that, deploying research-based R&D, deploying these new technologies in the public space can be a benefit to society? Shahid.
A great question again. And by the way, this has been completely unscripted, so well done. I think, look, one of the things we worked on, at least in the US, was around defining broadband speeds. Just to give you some sense, even in the US, as much as you could imagine it's a tech-heavy economy, there are about 20 million people without adequate broadband speeds. And just by defining what is broadband, meaning the specific KPI that defines download speeds and upload speeds, or downlink or uplink speeds, you can very quickly force the ecosystem to provide right type of broadband and really impact the digital divide that we see, not just in the US, South America, even parts of Middle East, Asia, even in Europe. So I think by just working on very specific metrics, as you pointed out, broadband speed, and redefining it from 10 meg down to 6 meg up, to upgrade that to 20 down, 10 up, you can impact a lot of different.
You can make a massive difference to people's lives, I think, really.
Yeah. And we know that we're so dependent on the internet today, it could very quickly increase your GDP.
That's absolutely, I think that's a really good point. Often very forgotten. Quickly, just last words, Stephane. How are you measuring your impact, and how are you measuring your success ultimately?
Well, it's becoming more independent on some technologies with time, but also growing our STEM population. So for us, it's very important that from the next 10 to 20 years, we will really bring more young Emiratis to science, which today we're still lagging, but the investments are very strong. I think it's going back to what I was saying at the beginning, knowledge economy is shifting from oil to something else.
Well, there you go. Shifting into the new economy, absolutely. Stephane Timpano, CEO of Aspire, and Shahid Ahmed, Group EVP from NTT. And from me, Mike Butcher, I thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a great conference.